As the Platters warned us that smoke gets in your eyes, and the music of Elvis Presley broke through heavily segregated racial barriers, LGBT public servants became public enemy number one in the United States. Bill was born in 1937. 8 years after his birth, in 1945, the Nazis were defeated and concentration camps liberated. Although those who survived were released, many of the men whose clothing had been marked by pink triangles were sent back to prison to serve the rest of the sentences that had been imposed on them as a result of the conviction for being homosexual. In the UK, the risk of prosecution, attack, or horrendous medical so-called treatment meant people lived in fear of being discovered. In August 2021, the research report on so-called conversion therapy and its impact on individuals had still to hit the desks of government ministers. Bill came out as gay in 1955, aged 18. Luckily for him, his foster mother was supportive, as was his GP, who referred him to a relatively sympathetic psychiatrist. Others were not so lucky, and many grew up in households where there was talk about those queers who were trying to get the law changed. By now, Charlie, aged 28, has acknowledged to himself that he is probably queer and feels pretty lonely and ashamed of his feelings. There are few positive role models, and his family have made their loathing of queers all too apparent. Charlie meets Margaret, who he likes, and they get married because that's what you do. He liked the idea of having children. Charlie goes on to make both personal and career choices that enable him to silence his identity for reasons of safety and practicality. Their daughter is born and they live in a small village. In 1954, aged 42, Alan Turing committed suicide. He had been influential in the development of computer science and the part of the team that cracked the Enigma code during the Second World War. Prosecuted in 1952 for homosexual acts, he had opted for chemical castration as an alternative to prison. During the early 1950s, as many as 1,000 men were locked into Britain's prisons every year, amid a widespread police clampdown on homosexual offences. Undercover officers, acting as agents provocateurs, would pose as gay men soliciting in public spaces. The prevailing mood was one of barely concealed paranoia. A prominent psychoanalyst in the 1950s named Irving Bieber believed that homosexuality was caused by pathological relationships between parents and children. Ignoring lesbianism entirely, he claimed that gay men came from binding, seductive mothers and distant, hostile fathers. He also felt that pre-homosexual boys were easily identifiable and should be treated early on to eradicate any signs of homosexuality. Robert knew he was different from a very young age, enjoying his mother's makeup and jewellery, not liking life as a boy at all.
In the 1960s, the Beatles wanted to hold our hands. Aretha Franklin was asking for a little respect, and Elvis was inadvertently holding change with It's Now or Never. Louise was born in 1960 to relatively liberal parents. By 1965, Bill, aged 28, had met his first significant boyfriend, and they moved in together, managing to find other gay men in some of the secretive gay bars and clubs that were emerging in London. The only women-only club was the infamous Gateways, one of the few places that lesbians could meet each other openly during the 40s and later into the 50s and 60s. Bill sat in the public gallery at Westminster when the Sexual Offences Act 1967 was passed, following publication of the Wolfenden Report in 1957, a landmark in LGBT+ history, although it only decriminalised sex between two men over the age of 21 and in private. At the time, the age of consent for heterosexual men was 18. Decriminalisation did not extend to the military or Scotland, Northern Ireland, the Channel Islands or the Isle of Man, where sex between two men remained illegal. In 1968, the DSM reclassified homosexuality as a sexual deviation, continuing to label any type of homosexual behaviour as abnormal. It had previously been classified as a sociopathic personality disturbance. In 1969, when John and Yoko were asking us to give peace a chance, police raided the Stonewall Inn, a gay club in New York City, and began to single out people who were in violation of laws that today would be considered homophobic and discriminatory. It had only been legal for bars to serve alcohol to LGBT+ people since 1966. The riots came as many considered the raid on the bar to be the final straw. They would last for 5 days. Lesbians and trans women of colour were some of the key people involved, alongside many other LGBT+ people and their allies. This act of resistance was considered to be the birthplace of the LGBT+ fight for liberation and equality. By now, Robert was aware of snide comments by shop assistants and realised he couldn't enjoy wearing women's attire too much, or people might talk. At the same time, black Americans were organising to end discrimination and gain equal rights, resulting in laws to protect constitutional rights regardless of colour, race, sex or national origin. This was mirrored by similar struggles for equality in the UK.
Despite the village people going west and dancing to YMCA, few gay people in Britain were publicly out, and even fewer publicly campaigned for change. However, dedicated activists knew that taking to the streets and being visible was a key strategy in the pursuit of equal rights. The Gay Liberation Front, GLF, first met in London's School of Economics in October 1970. They were inspired by the GLF movement in the United States and drew up demands focused on group activities, realising the power of collective voice. Its activities led to London's first Gay Pride March in 1972. Bill's boyfriend is a leading light in the struggle for gay rights. By the mid-70s, their relationship ends and Bill moves back to Shropshire. In 1974, Maureen Colquhoun was outed as the first lesbian MP in the Labour Party. When elected, she was in a heterosexual marriage. After coming out, her party refused to support her. Also, in 1974, the first national TVTS Transvestite Transsexual Conference is held in Leeds, organised by the Beaumont Society. They were a support group founded in 1966 for people assigned male at birth who lived and identified as female, then referred to as transsexuals, or who preferred to present as female some or all of the time. Robert was trapped by the usual expectations and in 1975, under a good deal of family and peer pressure, married. He remembers that everyone was happy, but he was so sad. He took his marriage vows seriously and to all intents and purposes presented as a responsible married man and then father. And in 1977, the first Gay and Lesbian TUC conference took place to discuss workplace rights for gays and lesbians.
Around this time, Robert's wife found some of his feminine clothing and he trod a difficult path, trying to do right by everyone, juggling family and work responsibilities, at the same time being told it's not natural. Bill, meanwhile, has found love again, as Wham make it big, and he and his boyfriend have regular work on market stalls around Shropshire. They don't really know many other people like themselves though, and live a quiet life. By now, Louise is living with her friend in a flat on the outskirts of a small town. She has little contact with her family, no brothers and sisters, and is working as a teacher in a small secondary school. In 1981, a 49-year-old man dies due to an AIDS-related illness. His is to be the first death in the UK. He was a gay man and a frequent visitor to the United States. If you watch the TV series It's a Sin, you'll have a fair idea of the way that many gay men were treated during the early onset of the AIDS crisis. It was apparent that many thought there was something very wrong with LGBT+ people, and in particular associated being gay with AIDS. The prevailing attitude of many was that the disease itself was deserved. The provision of HIV services that are specific to the needs of LGBT+ people were, and in many countries still are, inadequate, as the needs of people from these groups are not given priority by governments. Many saw their friends become sick and often die with inadequate support or medical resources. Then, just when we thought that the 1980s couldn't get any worse, Section 28. In 1986, the then Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher introduces Section 28, voted into law in 1988. It was viewed by many as the most anti-gay piece of legislation of modern times, becoming law amid a tsunami of fear and hatred, and undoubtedly impacted on the lives of many, including those who were already stigmatised because they had AIDS. Section 28 made it illegal for schools or councils to speak positively about homosexuality, forbidding the promotion of what she called pretended families. Books featuring any LGBT plus references were prohibited. Young gay people were made to feel isolated, and information about LGBT plus support could not be provided through schools. And, according to Mrs. Thatcher, children are being taught they have an inalienable right to be gay. All these children are being cheated out of a sound start in life. The Daily Mail lambasted local councils for promoting homosexuality to children at the taxpayers' expense. Louise visits her doctor and he informs her enthusiastically that she teaches his children. She feels really uncomfortable and leaves the surgery without discussing the issues that were concerning her. She becomes anxious that her personal life will come under scrutiny. The headmaster of the school enthusiastically endorses Section 28. Louise's friends want her to take part in a rally against Section 28. However, she's frightened of not only losing her job, but of being seen by people who live near her. She fears for her safety. In response to Section 28, actor Sir Ian McKellen came out as gay on BBC Radio 3 and subsequently co-founded Stonewall, a group to campaign and lobby for LGBT plus rights, along with Michael Cashman, then famous for the first gay kiss on BBC primetime TV in EastEnders. Piers Morgan, writing in The Sun, flagged up the disgust of certain Tory MPs who were revolted by these perverted practices. Section 28 remained in force until 2003. In 2009, British Prime Minister David Cameron issued a public apology for it. Much damage had been done though, and evidence suggests there is a cyclical relationship between stigma and HIV. People who experience stigma and discrimination are marginalised and made more vulnerable to HIV, while those living with HIV are more vulnerable to experiencing stigma and discrimination. Section 28 contributed to this in the UK. Meanwhile, Charlie is living in a state of constant anxiety, fearful of making a mistake. He exists in his visible life as a father, husband, colleague, and a respected heterosexual member of the community. In his hidden life, the one where he feels most alive, Charlie is a gay man who has a long-term lover, and they talk of how they wish things could have been. At this time, even the famous were mostly hidden, often in plain sight.
The 90s brought the start of the girl and boy band era. Bill's boyfriend has left him, and by the end of the decade he is lonely. The bombing of a gay pub in London, the Admiral Duncan, was very frightening. It was bombed by former British National Party member David Copeland, killing 3 people and wounding at least 70. Despite being hundreds of miles away, Bill feels the impact on his own life and retreats further into himself. He does not know where to go to meet people who understand how he feels. Finally, after 24 years, homosexuality was removed from the World Health Organization's classification of mental disorders. Many LGBT+ people in the UK have been subjected to aversion treatments and detrimental counselling as a result. May 17th was chosen as the International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia and Biphobia. Robert now finds himself living a double life. Work travel made it possible to dress as he pleased when not at home. But it took its toll, and when his wife becomes ill, he realises he needs to care for her and may never be able to be who he really is. In 1994, the Conservative Member of Parliament, Edwina Currie, introduces an amendment to lower the age of consent for homosexual acts from 21 to 16, in line with that of heterosexual acts. The age of consent for men was eventually dropped to 18. The lesbian age of consent was not set. In June 1994, the London Lesbian Avengers were founded, and amongst other things campaigned on behalf of comedian Sandy Toshvig when she came out in 1994, after being dropped as the MC of a Save the Children charity event. Apparently, Save the Children were concerned that this piece of news would detract from the main focus of the event. Further, it was alleged that Save the Children didn't want Princess Anne to have to meet a lesbian. Sandy Tochvig said that the charity told her that the decision was confidential. They told me not to tell anyone. They told me to keep it a secret. I don't know what they thought. Save the children! Apart from the gay ones. In 1999, the Sex Discrimination Gender Reassignment Regulations were passed. For the first time, the rights of people who are transgender were respected, and they were included within the Sex Discrimination Act 1975 for the purposes of employment and vocational training. Louise and her partner moved to the country so that they can live away from the possibility of judgment from others. They fill their home with reminders of the life that they have shared. Sadly, Louise's partner of 25 years becomes unwell and dies. Louise greatly misses and mourns the woman she loves, known only to others as a close friend.
Employment Equality Sexual Orientation Regulations 2003 eventually provides LGBT plus employees with the same protections as heterosexual people. Protection from discrimination, harassment and victimisation at work, to be enshrined finally in the 2010 Single Equality Act. However, having lived a lie for so long, Louise doesn't disclose her sexual orientation to her colleagues, nor does she ever discuss the amazing life that she shared with her partner for 30 years. She has learned over time that there are too many people who would consider her to be abnormal. She's learned how best to fit in, making constant decisions about how to avoid potentially difficult or discriminatory situations. Louise is thinking about her future. Her secrecy means that she has few people close to her that she is herself with, and she wonders how she'll manage as she gets older and may need support. Bill still searches for love. He has many pen pals, a few relationships, but doesn't find anyone he feels he can trust and continues to live alone. He has had no contact with family for nearly 50 years. There was a lot going on for him, but Robert managed to find opportunities to enjoy part of his life when working away from home. The double life continues though. With his wife's long-term condition, Robert's caring role becomes the norm, with very little expectation of role change in the future. Then, after a massive campaign and being forced to listen to same-sex relationships being put under much scrutiny, the Civil Partnership Act 2004 allowed same-sex couples to legally enter into binding partnerships similar to marriage.
In 2013, same-sex couples were granted the right to marry in England and Wales, 2014 in Scotland and 2020 in Northern Ireland. Though equal marriage in the UK, it probably wouldn't hold much sway in one of the over 70 countries where same-sex relationships are still criminalised. And then later, in 2013, the Turing Law was announced. Thousands of living men convicted over consensual same-sex relationships are eligible for a pardon, following the pardoning of World War II codebreaker Alan Turing for gross indecency. George Montagu, who was also convicted in 1974, said that he wants an apology, not a pardon. To accept a pardon means you accept that you were guilty. I was not guilty of anything. I was only guilty of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, he told BBC Newsnight. Bill gets involved with his local church and decides not to reveal his sexuality, following a glib comment made by another parishioner, which he feels was homophobic and made him feel unsafe. When Charlie is 74, his wife passes away. With his children grown and living their own lives, Charlie moves into a small flat closer to his long-term lover. They speak of the future and make plans to find a care setting that will welcome them as a couple. Robert's wife dies, and over the next few years he allows himself to enjoy being who he is, at least some of the time. He finally decides that he will live full-time as who he really is, telling the family, most of whom already knew, and telling people at work. Jane transitioned over several years from 2013. Even the Daily Mail picked up the story, which was pretty upsetting, but she decided that as a relatively public local figure, it was best to ignore it and not fan any flames. Jane was fortunate to have a sympathetic GP and support through the NHS. Writing her story as part of an exhibition of trans lives, Jane weeps as she remembered how much of her life was decided by the expectations of others and the doing of the right thing.
UK MP Layla Moran revealed in an interview with Pink News that she is pansexual, and she is believed to be the first UK parliamentarian to come out as such. Following his pardon, it transpired that Alan Turing would be the first LGBT plus person to appear on a banknote. A £50 note though, so my guess is that not many of us will actually ever see it in real life. And then a pandemic. The experiences of LGBT plus people across the UK during lockdown have been as diverse as the community itself. But it seems that many have struggled, feeling trapped in places where they aren't wanted and or fearing being out in case of retribution from families. The impact on people's mental health has been worrying, particularly as there are so few support services in the community for people who identify as LGBT+. In 2021, Bill dies, aged 83. He has had poor health for many years, but his death is still a shock. A housing warden tries to contact his family members, but the phone numbers they have are no longer active. Suddenly, people realise that they knew very little about Bill, his life, what was important to him, who cared about him, or who might want to attend his funeral. Life has developed well for Jane, and her retirement continues to be a source of opportunity to build awareness and support for others, together with a lifestyle which reflects her experiences and interests. So far, so good.